Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Now, we've gotten into the raid testing and M+ testing for Season 3, and I wanted to give my thoughts on where Discipline Priest and Holy Priest stand thus far with the changes, okay? So, let's start off with Disc in Raid. Big takeaways that we've learned from a lot of the raid testing so far is that mana feels pretty rough. One of the biggest changes going into Season 3 was some very high increases to the mana cost of a few of our spells, namely the biggest one being Powered Radiance getting a fat 20% cost increase. There's a ton of encounters where if you over-apply some renews, over-apply a couple of atonements or something like that, you get massively punished, and we've kind of been down this route in the past in raids where Disc was like the most mana inefficient healer in years past. You know, I'm thinking things like BFA, even Legion in certain moments as well, where you just like needed to be the one with innervates. You needed to be so precise with all your atonement application because you just bursted so hard and everything. And I feel like this is a really big mistake. A lot of how Disc works is not gated by your mana application any longer, like it used to be back in those expansions, because, you know, you would have an individual penance like in Legion hit really hard. This doesn't really work that way these days. You have to have a lot of your premonitions set up to be able to cast multiple penances in a row to actually do good healing, and making it really penalizing for dealing with the mana cost because of M+, I guess. We'll talk about M+ in a sec, but it just feels incredibly bad so far. The encounters themselves, I would say, are really cool, and this might be the best raid of the expansion yet. But also, there's a lot of moments where there's high movement and there's a lot of setup required for your healing. There's a lot of things to dodge. This raid is also a mega swirly raid, just like Liberation of Undermine was, and that can make it quite a bit more difficult to be able to set up your healing, especially when you're doing PTR and you're seeing the fights for the first time with no timers to start setting things up. So things will look a little rougher in this PTR footage than they probably will in practice, so just keep that in mind. Also, they did buff uppies by 35%, and it still feels really mediocre at a 4-minute cooldown. The 4-minute cooldown of uppies causes like a ton of problems for the spec, but one of the biggest ones is just how often you can use the ability. Particularly on a lot of the shorter fights, you can think of like one really good usage of uppies, and then you have like a second mediocre usage often happens. Talents like Overloaded with Light are really helpful when you have mana cost nerfs. The Radiance, you don't have to cast as many Radiances or cast as many single atonements to cover your raid, but it's a really expensive ability if you think about it, with how much of our output is tied to like penance damage, for example. Not being able to put that point in more penance damage will feel pretty bad. And as a result, Overloaded feels like a talent that is much worse as a result of the 4-minute cooldown that Uppies has, and even a bit of buffs for like the damage and healing make it feel a little more significant. But I think it would go really far if the ability was just a 3-minute, preferably even like a 2-minute, to be honest, but I doubt they would even go that far. It would make things a lot better with talenting into Overloaded. Just a fun ability to be able to look at and see on the screen, and it's a very powerful defensive. And so there's been more than a few times where you set up your healing and you're also in your most vulnerable position because you can't stop and heal yourself because you have to apply atonements to everybody before they run out, then extend, then deal damage, all of that. And yeah, Uppies is still kind of a mediocre ability, but still worth running, which doesn't feel like a great combination. What also doesn't feel great is Lenience. Lenience is our damage reduction, which just naturally applies via Atonement. They nerfed this in Season 2 from 3% DR to 2%, and it's still strong enough to be running constantly, but it's this invisible sort of healing that you get, this damage reduction you apply to everybody. You don't feel directly more powerful by taking it, and it also feels like you have an opportunity cost because you could take another talent that actually does healing and actually does, you know, buff up penance damage or extends the duration of like your shields with something like Eternal Barrier for longer shields, stronger shields, things like that feel really satisfying. It's an invisible output that is powerful and really insane to bring to progression rating and to high-end M+, but it feels really bad to take. And so I would love it if they got rid of this talent. The Warcraft Priest Discord had some really good ideas about trying to make our dots more relevant, for example, because they tried, that was like their goal in Season 2, and they've since abandoned this goal like crazy. I don't understand it. They were trying to buff up our dots and buff up talents like Expiation, where you munch, you consume the dot, and do bonus damage and everything. And those talents are still just crazy, crazy bad. So one, I'm surprised they've done nothing with that. And two, I'm surprised they kept lenience around and didn't replace it with something to work on that objective. It doesn't make any sense to me. You know, having your dots be stronger in your overall kit, because if you think about your healing breakdown, it is a big pie, you know, and you can dice it up into a whole bunch of sections, a whole bunch of slices, and you have a very, very thin slice for your Shadowed Pain. So that's just barely worth using and barely worth maintaining over some of your other options. But it's really not the end of the world if you missed it on a ramp or something along those lines. It doesn't feel impactful enough. Meanwhile, we're going to be spamming like 6 penances in a row, 5 penances in a row, just to do all of our healing and just kind of mashing one button over and over again. So that sort of gameplay feels not as satisfying. I think the way things stand at the moment, Preservation is still extremely powerful in raids, and Disc seems like fine. It'll be still really valuable for lenience and for barrier and everything along those lines. But this is recorded just before the mythic testing that we had, or that is coming up this week. So we'll see where it goes. But I'm a little worried about the state of Disc in raid, at least at the moment. When it comes to Mythic Plus, the lack of like big changes turns out to be a benefit for the spec, because you can still be playing Oracle, setting up fat shields, the usual things that have made the spec really good in Season 2. Now, if you missed that on Season 2, quick explainer is that you added this ability to Oracle called Twin Sight, which causes your offensive penance that's damaging an enemy to also cleave and heal an ally. Now, if you use penance defensively to heal an ally, it also goes offensively and hits an enemy. Now, the 2-set bonus for our tier set with Oracle is, of course, giving us bonus damage to our first penance bolt that we cast. So Twin Sight does not impact our 2-set bonus. It's just who you are casting that penance on that gets the extra benefit. That being said, you have a combo ability called Wheel and Woe, where those extra penance bolts do feed into Wheel and Woe, allowing you to just crank up massive shields onto your allies. So you can cover allies for a long period of time with heavy shields, preemptively setting up healing, and you can use your premonition abilities to basically combo with your pet to be able to do tons of healing and mitigation and everything before damage starts going out. So all that stuff staying the same, super powerful. It doesn't feel like you are the max HPS god by any means. I think that's kind of like Druid or maybe Shaman, but definitely Druid, I think, at the moment in the Mythic Plus meta. Stuff can change, tuning can change, of course. Some of the dungeon pools that we have are things like heavy poisons in our Akara, especially at the last boss. They did nerf those a little bit, so it's not as bad, which is good. And what I'm really worried about is curses, but we're not going to see that for another week. At the time of this video, we haven't tested Halls of Atonement on Mythic Plus yet, but we got to run it on M0s a little. There's still a lot of curses from some of the casters in there that just need to be dispelled, otherwise people explode. Shields will help with that a lot if you don't have as many dispels, but I am kind of curious if they're going to nerf some of those things. One of the biggest things that I'm thinking of when it comes to this next season is I'm not too worried about the healing checks. I'm not too worried about the healing profile. Disc kind of just has that covered. I think it's fair to say spec real good. What I am thinking about is what's the future going to hold? Unless they just pull a crazy rabbit out of their hat and they make some massive changes to how the spec works, it seems like we're headed down this Oracle path once again. Voidweaver is not in like a terrible position or anything along those lines. It's just a little bit too one-dimensional for what M Plus is throwing at you, in that it could heal very high keys with the new tier set bonus. The tier set bonus is incredibly powerful compared to a lot of other bonuses out there, but it still raises Voidweaver to being just a step below Oracle in a lot of different situations. Now, it does fat damage, like crazy, crazy damage, which is awesome to play with. If you want to focus on the DPS side and you enjoyed playing Voidweaver in Season 1, Season 2, it'll feel even better in Season 3. Doesn't seem like it's going to be better than Oracle, but it does raise the kind of question of like what's sustainable for Disc long term, because being able to have all these like fat shields onto everybody feels amazing and it's really cool. And I like how you kind of mix between direct healing with penance, some atonement healing, and some shielding with the Oracle subspec, but it's not sustainable long term to just have a spec have like, 5-second cooldown on a shield that'll cover over half their health bar. I mean, let's be real. What it all really leads to is they should probably bring back Rapture. and they should also make it compete in the evangelism slot. So evangelism got moved up in the tree. If you're not familiar with it, it's a lot easier to take, and it's a good button in dungeons. It's a boom, instant heal. That being said, I don't think a lot of people would miss evangelism in 5-mans if they replaced it with rapture. This is a good way to be able to make our shields relevant and keep them relevant long term, while also giving you control over when you're putting out fat shields and have to think about how you're putting out those fat shields onto everybody to better mitigate the damage. And it's also just a really fun ability to press. I think a lot of Disc Priests would be really sad if they just gutted our shields and, no shields for you, go cry. I don't think people would really miss evangelism if they had a choice node between the two in a 5-man environment. I think it's a nice way to be able to balance things out. And I hope that this is something they start thinking about more as Midnight comes around the corner, because at the moment there are modifiers for Power Word Shield in the Oracle tree itself, with Wheel and Woe, and with our Mastery, and there's a couple others as well. There's so many different ways that Shield just stacks and higher and higher and higher, that they need to start condensing a lot of this stuff, because it's just bloated, and it often becomes like a mess to play around as a healer. And so I hope this is one of the areas that they address and start thinking about going forward, because I know a lot of people miss Rapture, I know a lot of people want it back, and I think it'd be a really good way to keep shields relevant without making them oppressive for the entire environment. One key note is everyone is kind of getting some extra shield value in the next season, because there is a trinket coming up, and it's a haste trinket where on a 1.5-minute cooldown, you put shields on everybody, and it absorbs 75% of the damage, so 25% of the damage goes through, 75% gets absorbed. Until you absorb, it was 5 or 6 million damage per person. And so it's a 30 to 40% health shield every 1.5 minutes you could put onto your entire party. Really, really cracked as a shield. And every healer can have access to that. So it will still feel amazing to have shields as disc, but hopefully it'll feel a little less oppressive going into Season 3, since everyone will have a trinket like that. We'll see though. One big thing that's really relevant for disc is how they've changed around raid cooldowns in dungeons. Now, abilities like Divine Hymn, Trank, Healing Tide, they all got buffed for 5-mans to make them real abilities. Now for disc, they buff Luminous Barrier. And as much as I hate this ability, I cannot deny that it's actually good. It's actually pretty good in dungeons. Now, whenever you apply it, again, it's a 3-minute cooldown, puts up shields on everybody. It's around 30 to 40% of their HP. Similar to this Lumithar's Silk Trinket, but honestly a little bit worse because it's a 3-minute cooldown. But that being said, in a lot of situations, it can be better than Barrier. Now, for high-key, ultra-coordinated groups, you're still going to want to have Barrier, but 99.9% of you guys are running with pugs, and there's some demonic stuff going on, and they're not standing in your barrier. So being able to have an oh no button of Luminous Barrier that you can just slap on to everybody, it's just always going to be valuable. It's just always, we love shields. Oh, need I say more? They're just always going to be valuable. And so I think you're going to get a lot of mileage out of Luminous Barrier in your pug groups, in your pug adventures. Don't be surprised to see people running Barrier in high-end coordinated groups, because damage reduction gets better in the higher the keys that you go, because the more damage there is, the more damage mitigation there is, of course. But keep an eye on Luminous Barrier, because I don't think it's going to be like a troll pick or anything whatsoever. I think it'll probably be one of those good abilities to run before you hop into voice comms with random pugs or anything like that. So it's actually legit. Love to see it. All right, Holy Priest, long have you waited. Let's talk about Raid to start. I feel like this spec absolutely slaps when it comes to a raiding environment. I tried Archon and I tried Oracle. Archon still feels pretty similar to where we were at before. Their tier set bonus allows you to just get more halos out. Your holy words do more healing from the buff that your halo puts on targets. So your halo hits targets, make them take more healing, and take bonus healing from your holy words. And by casting your holy words, you get more halos. It's great. That being said, I think it is second candle to Oracle, and I think Oracle absolutely crushes for Holy Priest in the raid. You spend a lot of time with the tier set bonus giving you extra insight charges, which you can spend on Prayer of Mendings. It's cooldown reduction, basically, and you can spend extra Prayer of Mendings without incurring a cooldown. This feels insane because you're just constantly spamming out Prayer of Mendings, which take up the total activity time that you have in a raid. You know, you can only cast so many abilities in a raid at a time. And since Prayer of Mending heals a lot because your 2-set bonus is also triggering a bonus heal on your Prayer of Mending target that's equal to like half a Serenity. So every Prayer of Mending, you cast half a Serenity on the target, cast Prayer of Mending on the target, and then with Oracle's hero talent, you also cast a small shield. So it's a lot of output you put into one target consistently. It costs almost no mana, and it takes up the opportunity cost of not casting a more expensive spell. Also, you're reducing the cooldown of your Serenity too. So yeah, it's really crazy. And as a result, you're not really burning your mana. You can pool up more of your mana to spend on Prayer of Healing, which is high HPS, but also low mana efficiency. And so your mana feels really good because you're spending a whole bunch of time casting those Prayer of Mendings. And when you need to cast Poe, you can go cast it, and it's awesome. You also have a change to Epiphany. Now, what Epiphany used to do is you hit Prayer of Mending, and then you try to hit a Holy Word, and it would reset the cooldown of your Prayer of Mending. Now, it gives you a buff, and it completely ignores the cooldown of Prayer of Mending. So you can just cast a Prayer of Mending regardless of where the cooldown of the ability is at. So if you cast a Holy Word while you have 3 seconds of a cooldown on Prayer of Mending, you can instantly cast that Prayer of Mending, but then you kind of want to wait, or you want to make sure you're ready when Prayer of Mending comes off cooldown to cast it again. All of that is to say, you cast a lot of Prayer of Mendings, you run talents like Answered Prayers, which give you Apotheosis uptime. You sit in Apotheosis for a very long time with all of these Prayer of Mendings. Oh yeah, I also forgot your Oracle hero talent. Cast more Prayer of Mendings as well. So crazy amount of palms bouncing all over the place. Buff you up, put you in Apotheosis form. Your Holy Words cost half as much instead of 100% less. That's a key change they made this time around. But casting so many Prayer of Mendings doesn't really matter too much. It's really, really good. The downsides, though, is that a lot of your healing in the raid is kind of like a puff. It's a bit difficult to be able to properly describe it, but it's like you don't feel like too many of your abilities actually do a lot. It feels like your Prayer of Mendings do a lot. It feels like your Serenity and your Sanctify do a lot. And then the rest of your spells are kind of like a little puff onto this target, a little puff onto that target. They move up the health bars a little bit, but you have so much passive healing going on all at once that it doesn't feel like you are chunking up health bars quick. Now, that's okay because that's really never been Holy Priest's niche of like slow, powerful heals. That's kind of like a Holy Paladin thing, but there's a dial to it. There's a spectrum to it, right? We're on the spectrum of like, it feels like too many of your spells don't really do much. They don't really push up the health bars that you would hope for in a raid environment. It's very different than seeing like a buffed up Chain Heal or a Spirit Bloom go out onto targets. That being said, when your Holy Words are going off, those actually do feel really good. When you're playing properly around Apotheosis, comboing it with your Premonitions, especially Piety, and just dumping a whole bunch of Holy Words and getting all the overheal transfers, that stuff feels really, really strong and really, really valuable. So I think the spec is very much headed towards a Oracle raid tier, and it'll be probably the first time they go into progression starting with Oracle as well, which would be neat. Oracle really gained a lot of steam in Liberation of Undermine in Season 2, and now I think it's going to start from that perspective and I think it's headed towards being one of the meta healers for the raid. Still very early at the time of this recording. We haven't done all our Mythic raid testing yet, so things can change, of course, but low defensives, low mobility, no kick, all the other things that we're all used to. Those things aside, the spec feels very, very good in the raid. Mana feels good. I think the encounters feel really good. And when you need to pool up some spot healing, you can do that very well. And I love sitting in Apotheosis. It kind of just makes everything else feel better too, which is nice. Now, I mentioned this in the disc section. If you missed it, what are you doing? Like and subscribe, at least, please. Now, every healer in Mythic Plus is getting this trinket called Lumithar's Living Silk. So if you're not a raider, get ready to raid, okay? This is a really busted trinket, at least at the moment. Hopefully they don't nerf it too bad. 1.5-minute cooldown, puts absorbs on your entire party, and the effect is like 30 or 40% of people's health bars. This is a wonderful amount of shielding, and it's so crucial to playing Holy Priest as well, because sometimes you just need to have a little layer of extra safety to keep everybody in a healthy position. And this trinket does a phenomenal job. A lot of the issues with Holy Priest in dungeons is survivability and some quick spread healing that are probably like the big issues. And as a result, this trinket kind of just bolsters up some of your weak spots and makes it a lot easier to be able to make good decision making when it comes to your target selection. When it comes to the tier sets and hero talents, I really think Oracle kicks the crap out of Archon with the tier set bonuses being the way they are. Instant healing tied to your Prayer of Mending with the 2-set bonus is absurdly valuable because you want to cast a lot of Prayer of Mending in dungeons, especially when there's going to be rot damage or ticking damage. But there's a nasty habit of Prayer of Mending to kind of sit on a target and linger. It'll sit on a target that hasn't taken any damage for a while, and then your palms can expire. But you don't want to just give up on casting the palms, because whenever there's pulsing damage, it is a massive benefit. You really notice when you have those Prayer of Mendings around to help out. And so the 2-set bonus kind of fixes all those problems, because you just want to cast it anyway for the 2-set bonus, providing the half Serenity strength to be able to heal people. And as a result, your spot healing gets better, your movement healing, I guess you could call it, your healing while moving gets better as you have another instant cast spell that does real healing to a target to push up their health bars. And you know, that like 2 to 4% HP shield isn't nothing, so at least it's going to get some extra value. I think it usually is like 3 to 5% of my overall healing in dungeons, which isn't bad for something that happens totally for free. Divine Hymn also got a buff for 5-mans, where it does 100% more healing in a 5-man environment. This has gotten to be a pretty solid cooldown that can push up some health bars onto its own. It's not going to carry you. I think some of the other abilities like Trank really carry, but it's very good to be able to utilize, especially at the start of damage events, to carry for the first couple moments, especially if you have a lot of pulsing damage or rot damage and your Prayer of Mendings are bouncing around like crazy. But it also gives you the healing buff later on after your Divine Hymn, so you can follow it up with, you know, maybe like a Piety or maybe a whole bunch of Holy Word casts and some Prayer of Healing. You have a few different options there to take advantage of it. It actually feels like it's a cooldown that can help you instead of just being this like pre-buff before damage happens. When it comes to your mana expenditure, it's kind of similar to Raid in that you don't have, oh my god, amazing mana or anything like that. You know, Holy Priest as a spec still wants to micro drink constantly, just kind of get a sip here and there anytime, because you don't want to fall behind or anything in mana throughout your runs. The 2 and 4-set bonus for Oracle help this a lot and make sure that you're casting lots of Prayer of Mendings, and it makes all your other healing more efficient. But I don't think you're going to be running anything like Answered Prayers to get you into Apotheosis consistently, because the procs are just kind of a little bit too random. The dungeons don't have enough rot damage to really justify it. But when you do actually cast Apotheosis, that spell hard carries in a lot of different ways, especially when you will run with a Prayer of Healing build. It allows you to just crank out huge amounts of burst output, which is phenomenal. Oracle's Piety for the overheal redirect allows you just to slam down Holy Words with Abandon, with Reckless Abandon, and then all the overheal will transfer to the people that they need. So your burst output's in a phenomenal position if you're able to time a lot of your cooldowns together. You don't have quite as quick of cooldowns as Disc does, for example. But when you're playing, especially around like Lightweaver, Resonant Words, to crank up the strength of your Prayer of Healings, you get some really solid value. And I think that massively helps out for what we've seen so far in these dungeons that feature a pretty good amount of burst AoE and a lot of prio target healing, pretty similar to what we saw at a Season 2. And so it seems like the dungeon profiles, at least at the moment, are kind of in a similar fashion. The raw, like just mass AoE is kind of isolated to a few bosses. Things like Arakara, Dawnbreaker have a few of them so far. We'll see what the Legacy dungeons next week are going to bring with like Halls of Atonement and Tazvesh, if there's any other big damage profile type changes. But I think Holy is flexible enough to deal with them in big ways. And running with the trinket like Lumithar's Silk shores up a lot of the weak spots for the spec as well. So you have a lot of really good tools at your disposal. It's really just survivability that becomes the one thing you have to have a lot of control over. But if you can get enough versatility, it makes it a lot easier. Like once I started getting to like 20-ish% versatility in Season 2 in my Holy Priest keys, everything got massively easier because you know you're going to survive a hit. And then you can just focus on like healing up everybody. You deal with it. Restitution helps a lot as well. So you got a couple different options out there. Overall, really excited for where the specs are going to be headed. And well, it seems like we've gotten kind of light changes, and there's always more that we wish they would do. I think at least they're leaving them in a good position from Season 2 to enter into Season 3. And I'm really, really looking forward to seeing another round of changes as well. Hopefully for both specs, they kind of make mana less of this mandatory sort of thing to be able to micromanage, because I don't think any healer loves being in a position where their mana just sucks in 5-mans especially. It's just not fun. It's just not fun. But let me know if I missed anything. Huge thank you to our patrons for making all this sort of content possible. Let me know if there's any other spec highlights or big questions that you guys have entering into Season 3, because we're going to be streaming a crazy amount of testing for all the healers, covering them in M+, covering as many as we can in Raid as well. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.